Hi, folks. My name is Girish, the host for Back to Basics, another Back to Basics for another week. Today, we're going to talk about organization, management, diversity, change. Those are the words that we'll be using that today. And it is so damn needed, isn't it? If it is not needed, we'll discuss that as to why it's not needed. But there is definitely a need. That is for sure. And today is a guest that we are going to talk about these words and these languages that we're going to talk today and why is it so damn important in this world. His name is Fredrick. Fredrick is an amazing person. I spoke with him a couple of times weeks before and then a few minutes right before the recording. So get to know him better and ping him if you like to ask any questions, because I'm pretty sure he's willing to learn and unlearn and teach you guys all the stuff that he knows. So let's bring Fredrick to the table and then we'll discuss. Fredrick, how are you? And thanks for coming to Back to Basics.
I'm great. I'm great, sir. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate the time and the conversation. I'm
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again, Fredrick. So, before we get into the details of the topic today, and the words that I've used today is the organization and the change of the world and everything. What does Back to Basic mean to you?
Great question. Back to basics. I mean, it can take various forms, but I'm gonna view it through the lens of my discipline around change management and organizational transformation. So, back to basics to me in that form says one thing: the human being. So, getting back to serving and taking care of the human need at its simplest forms. One
Hmm.
of the things that I often say in our art of change management is that somehow, some way, the people side of change has gotten lost.
Hmm. Yeah, is that a shame? But it is part of our life. This is what it is, isn't it, Fred? Uh,
Yes, yes, it is. It very much is. It's often funny when I hear people say, organizations that, well, when things slow down, when change stops, then we can add on more change. And the reality of it is, if you haven't figured it out now, change will never cease to end, and it's only going to get faster. So the idea of waiting until it stops or waiting until it slows down
yeah.
is only prolonging the inevitable. Rather looking at how do we get better at it
Hmm.
and build a design for change versus trying to manage it, if you will.
Yeah. Frederick, thank you again for answering that question, and thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Definitely honored for you to be here. You know, you keep on mentioning about change and change and change, right? Is it because we're talking less about it? Do you think that we should talk more about it? What are your thoughts on that? Because it seems like we don't talk enough about diversity. We don't talk about organizations. We don't talk about how we're supposed to act and not act. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. No. So I'll take the first one first around change, and so our thoughts about talking about change. Uh, we talk about change. We just talk about it in the wrong context. We talk about change in the context of whether we need to restructure an organization, whether we need to implement new technology, whether we need to look at how we include something in our culture that is not there. I think diversity and inclusion and equity is one of those things that hit on that. But what we don't talk about enough, in my opinion, is the human aspect of change.
Hmm.
When you think about the discipline of change management itself, it all started and all came about from being focused on the people side of change and not the process, not the technology, and not the other aspect of it. So
Hmm.
I think people are talking about change, but they're talking around it
Hmm.
versus talking about how do we ensure that the human being in all of this change is taken care of, and that we put them at the center, and that we put them at the center of it.
Yeah, Frederick, thank you again. Does that mean I'm just going to be a hypothetical situation
Yeah.
here? Now you got all these management and not talking to the lower folks, right?
Yeah.
Or is it the lower folks not talking to the management? Because sometimes they're scared too, right?
Sure.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. It's a combination. It's a combination of both. So it is leaders in the organization, which in my opinion is definitely a curse, thinking that they have all the answers. So let me go out and do everything for the actual organization and for the actual people within the organization. Now, there are certain aspects that come along with being a leader thinking about what's going to be the strategic direction, where we're going to be in 5 years, all these other elements that, yes, that is the leader's responsibility to come up with, craft, develop, and chart that course. But there is definitely an aspect of how do you include the people within that organization in such a way to where it feels like, and it's clear to them that you're doing something with them and not for them, as well as how do you bring people along on a journey with you versus trying to push them to take the journey with you, or force fit them into a certain process, or into a certain aspect of the business itself, and hoping that they come along. That's typically you hear when people talk about adoption, and it is how do we ensure that people adopt what we're doing. Now, from a staff perspective, there is a certain aspect that one of the things that people often ask me, if I could sum up, change in one word, what one word would that be? And I always come back to choice. Change is a choice. So no matter what it is, whether you're looking at how do we lose weight, how do we get better at finances, how do we get better at becoming a better speaker, whatever it is, it boils down to making a personal choice and how you're going to approach that particular change, and how you view and how you approach that change will be directly related to how you impact that change and how that change impacts you. If I get up every morning hating to go to the gym, chances are I'm probably not going to go, and I'm probably not going to get the change that I want, versus if I choose to enjoy the gym, or choose to look at the gym being a part of the process that needs to get me to my goal, and viewing it as such, then my aspect around that is a whole lot better. So it's definitely a two-sided coin. It takes both parts, both the leadership and staff within an organization.
Yeah, Frederick, thank you again, because you know what? It's a two-way street when it comes to communication, isn't it?
It is.
And it seems like people are, when I say people, I mean employees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Employees, they do get scared from the leadership that maybe they might be penalized. I mean, this is just in the back of the head, even though that it might not happen,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how do we make that trust happen? And I think I think the leadership should step ahead and talk to the employees versus talking down to the employees.
Sure. Absolutely. There's I'm going to use the common buzzword that's going on, psychological safety. Psychological
Okay,
safety
yes.
is definitely one of the hot buzzwords that is going around, and so it is definitely the leaders responsibility to create the environment, to ensure that, whether it is being done through vulnerability. So you have a lot of leaders taking the aspect of admitting failure, when that was something that 5-10 years ago a leader wouldn't dare to go in front of his organization, he or she's organization.
That's right.
And say, you know what, I dropped the ball, I messed up on something, I didn't get this right, I'm going to right this wrong, whatever it may be. So being able to be vulnerable, to create that space for talking about certain aspects of things, is definitely on the leaders. And going back to the staff, it's no different than the other thing. It's no different than change. So
yeah,
it is still upon that person to feel like they could voice their opinion, voice what is being heard, and then ask themselves throughout that process. There's a sort of a tool that I've used in organizational and cultural transformation, where we look at certain aspects of elements of an organization. And I asked the simple question: is this a fact or is this a belief? And so is it a fact that if I share an idea, or if I disagree, that I am going to somehow get fired? Or is that a belief that somehow created a narrative throughout the organization, that once you tell a story long enough, it becomes real in people's mind, and they've created this narrative of, if I speak up, I'm going to be retaliated against. If I share my opinion, then somehow something is going to happen to me. So you have to go through that. You have to go through that process and ask yourself that. And then ultimately you have to look at, from a staff perspective, is how important is this thing to me because if I feel like this is important enough for me to want to share and for me to want to voice, then I'm going to do that, and I am going to voice that and throw caution into the wind and do that. Um, people I get the question around, the trajectory of my career, and so how did I get to this point? I feel like I'm just starting. I got way more to go,
Yeah.
and I often say that I've always been a risk taker,
Mm.
and a part of risk taking is not being afraid to let my voice be heard,
Of course.
and accepting whatever the fallout may be around that. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, Fredrick, thank you again. We talked about the communication within the organization. So
Mhm.
now the next step is transformation. And changing. So what we have been in back in the days, we used to transform in a different manner, and now we're in a new era. How does that transformation is working today in today's world or tomorrow's world? What are your thoughts on that? And then we're going to touch a little about diversity, about the transformation too. So explain that if you don't mind.
Yeah, great question. How is it happening today? I think it depends on who you are and what sector you sit in and what's taking place. And so if you find yourself in well, I'll use the example of a streaming platform. So you find yourself working for a Hulu, a Netflix, Amazon Prime. Transformation is happening at a rapid pace, and it's probably going great because you're able to not only carve out a niche for yourself in an already saturated market, but you're also able to predict the future in such a way to where you're able to still penetrate that market and have growth in there, and the people around you also share and have that same vision.
Mm.
So transformation in that aspect and in that industry, I would say is probably is going well. Or if you work for Tesla, you're way ahead of the curve. Now, if you were in the industry, education, I think education is definitely one that your transformation education is still extremely slow. If you even look at how we teach grades, K through 12 today, the 80% of it is probably still through. And I haven't been in the classroom in forever, so forgive me, educators, that you're standing up in front of a class lecturing to a student about a topic.
Mm.
And that was going on way back in the 1800s. And so when you think about it in that aspect, how far have we advanced, even with all the technology, all the tools, all the things that are taking place out there? How much have we advanced in that aspect of it too? And so I think it depends on uh, the industry that you're in. I am a firm believer in that if you fail to transform, you will probably fail to exist in the future.
Mm. You brought up a great point, and I was just going to go and counter that. There are people in Gen X's and Gen Y's are trying to catch up with the Gen Z's and the new folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is it safe to say, and I'm going to repeat, and I'm going to be really particular about this, is it safe to say that if we don't catch up and learn, we're going to fall behind and fail?
Absolutely. It is not, and I'm going to counter that with, it is not enough to catch up. We have to leapfrog in certain aspects of it.
Mm.
So if you're in an industry and you're trying to catch up to the early 2000s based on what systems are doing, I'll use healthcare as the example. So you still have healthcare and health systems has been around for the last 10, 15 years. You look at Kaiser Permanente, Mayo Clinic, they adopted a system structure a long time ago. And you'll take the other side of healthcare from an academic standpoint, from like an academic medical center, for example, or a standalone hospital that is not part of a system. There you have organizations trying to catch up and be where Kaiser was or Mayo Clinic 15 years ago today. And if you just get to 15 years ago today, you're still behind. So in some essence, you have to leapfrog where you are, where you may be thinking you need to be, and go all the way to the end of where things are going to. Yeah.
Frederick, you brought up a great point when it comes to education. You brought up a
Mhm.
great point when it comes to health. But honestly, I think I'm going to counter that, and I'm going to say almost every industry that you can think of
Sure.
is. I think we're just far behind, and we're talking from a person who's even a podcaster is falling behind because there's other things that we're learning every day.
Yeah.
There's a person who is a accounts manager is falling behind. A project manager, whoever is falling behind because there are new things happening. And if, obviously in the IT field, you're always going to be behind no matter what you do, right?
Right.
So, so that's what I'm saying. I think almost every industry, whatever we talk about, I think we're always going to fall behind. Even
Sure.
a simple thing as a person who's writing a book and who's an author, because there's always new things learning when it comes to book writing, even though that it might be the simplest thing of just writing a book.
Right.
I mean, that's just my thought process. I don't know about you, but that's just what I feel
Hmm.
when it comes to these things. So,
Yeah.
the last thing, if you don't mind, are we talking enough when it comes to human connection and diversity? When it
Sure.
comes to the organization and the transformation world that we're getting into? Because I think we're getting into a value graphic world, which is the value of human connection. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Great. Great question. I'm going to answer it this way. I do think that organizations are talking about it enough.
Hmm.
Where organizations are missing the mark is action. And my biggest fear from a diversity, equity, and inclusion standpoint, right, is that at some point it doesn't become the shiny star that it is today.
Hmm.
It's important. It's all of it's important,
Hmm.
but we also know that the 2020 and 2021 DEI skyrocketed. And if you didn't have it, you had to have it. And people went out and they started building organizations and building teams and looking at their do they have enough of this and do they have enough of that and doing all these trainings. But where I feel like organizations are missing the target is how are you creating a culture first off that DEI and diversity exudes naturally throughout your organization, so you don't have to go and look for it. It
Right.
speaks for it. It speaks for itself.
Hmm.
Are
Right.
you designing your systems and structures in a way to also support that too as well?
Hmm.
Thirdly, and probably most importantly, are you having the uncomfortable conversations around diversity in a very action oriented way?
That's right.
If a leader comes to me and says, "Hey, I want to do a diversity audit on my department," then we don't need to do an audit. You already know you don't have diversity because you wouldn't be coming to someone asking
That's
for an
right.
audit.
That's right.
You already know the answer to that. And being able to infuse and make sure it's a part of your culture, as well as having those uncomfortable conversations, but also taking a stance on things, is also important, and in building in mechanisms to ensure that you have diversity in it. And I'll also say looking at diversity uh, beyond race and gender, and religion, but it's also diversity of thinking, and bringing new ideas and bringing new concepts and bringing new ways of operating to the table, and not relying on what's been tried and true throughout the years and saying, well, we've always done it this way, and
Hmm.
now we're going to continue to do it this way. So having diversity of thought. I remember I spent a large part of my career in healthcare,
Hmm.
and I can remember in the early, I'm going to probably say in the early to mid 2000s, where if you weren't already in healthcare, you weren't getting in healthcare, because healthcare had this perception of only we knew how healthcare works. So if you didn't already work at a hospital, chances of you coming from a Chevron or coming from another organization and saying and coming into healthcare was almost impossible, because it was a bubble that we felt like if you weren't already a part of us, you didn't understand us,
Hmm.
and so how could you help us?
Hmm.
And then over time, they started to realize that that wasn't true. That we were only, if you're in a room of just people who think, act, drink, and feel like you, you're only going to get the same thing over and over. So you start to slowly see healthcare being penetrated with other people from other industries that didn't have anything to do with healthcare, but they brought a skill set and an experience to the table to help advance the organization in the way that it needed to be.
Yeah. So thank you again. I mean, the key is, I think what I'm grasping here is, I think the companies or employers should have a culture that these type of questions should not be asked, because I think it's part of the culture. And when it becomes part of the culture, I think that's the new change, right?
Yes.
Because I think if you make that openness of talking, not in a rude way, obviously,
Yes.
openness talking, I think it becomes a very nice way and nice environment to work in. So I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's another way of
Yeah.
a transformation going through from a human connection point of view,
Sure.
and an organization, as we talked earlier.
Yeah.
Frederick, before we leave today, can you explain where you work and what you do, and why did I bring you here? Because people must be wondering, where did this Frederick guy come from, and talking about all the stuff that we're talking today. So explain, if you don't mind, before you leave today.
Sure. No, thank you for that. And so I am Fredrick Martin, and a couple of things about me. I currently head up change implementation and design for this build team, which is a human centered design consultancy, as well as I am the senior director of change management at the University of Virginia, where I oversee transformation in the academic division as well as UVA health. And I have been in the world of change management for 15 plus years, working for large healthcare organizations, as well as I started out my career in offshore outsourcing, and cut my teeth in the call center industry, and it's become a lover and a practitioner of change. I approach change in a way that my goal is always to leave people, departments, and organizations better than I found them. And if I'm able to do that in any way, I can check the box and I'm good to go.
Yeah. So Frederick, thank you again for explaining who you are and what you do and what you don't do, because it seems like you do a lot.
I do.
And it's not enough, it looks like, Frederick. And then on top of that, you took your precious time to talk to me and talk to all of us here. So thank you again for coming here. But before you leave today, and before you end the call today, how is your journey on Back to Basics? And do you have any last words for all my listeners and my viewers on my show?
The journey's been phenomenal. One of the things that I enjoy most about your podcast is that no two days are alike, in a sense. You have a great variety of guests and topics that people can and should explore. And so I encourage your listeners to not only listen to this podcast and love it, but also go back through your catalog and check out previous guests, because they may be very surprised about the things that they come across. And so I'll share that.
Yeah. Thank you again, Frederick, for coming here and supporting me on this small podcast of mine. Talking about change management, talking about operations, talking about transformations, talking about diversity, and how we used to and how we will be changing the world, kind of, right, in a small way. And these small ways, and every employees, I think it changes the world one by one. And we can only hope to do it one by one, right? Because others also have to make the due diligence to do the same thing as what we're doing in your organization, and so is mine. So thank you again, Frederick, for coming here and supporting me.
Thank you. I appreciate the time and the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Frederick. So guys, we spoke with Frederick today, and we talked about diversity. We talked about organization and change, as I just said earlier. But there's one thing that he did say: it takes the whole village to go and come with that change, right? Well, that's not what he said, but that's what I said. So as usual, as always, there's a quote of the day from Back to Basics, and hopefully Frederick will like that the quote. The quote is, "A diverse mix of voice leads to better discussion, decisions, and outcomes for everyone." It takes a talk, a decision, and that's what we're trying to do. it takes a village to make it happen. That's what I'm trying to say. As usual, as always, what do I always say at the end of the episode? Hopefully, Fredrick has done all the homework of all my episodes. Everything in life goes back to basics, and that's what we did today, guys. Guys, take care. God bless. Keep on commenting on all my episodes because it does help me in the long run to understand from you guys that you are listening, and this is definitely helpful. And if it is definitely helpful, this is something new that I'm trying here. If you think I'm helping you, please do comment and Instagram me and tag me or YouTube me or whatever it is, because I want you to understand that I'm helping you in whatever way and form. And there are three things in every episode I feel that is the hittest thing in the world, not of you. It's because of the topic, the guest, and definitely the host. Guys, take care, God bless, and keep on subscribing to Back to Basics, and see you next week. Next week's episode on Back to Basics. Be asking you for help.
Typically, they are, number one, it's where they currently are, right? What are they doing now? What's their desired state? And what are the things in between that we need to do to get them to that desired state? Because typically we may not be able to work with them if we're not a great fit. But typically what's in the middle between where they are and where they want to be are just two things. It's knowledge and action, right? So there is some lack of knowledge, whether it's like the example you gave before, maybe they need access to funding. Excellent. Great. We can help with that. So what is that knowledge gap? Is there